The stunning unsolved murder of JonBenet Ramsey. It's a case so mystifying that nearly 3 decades later, still leaving people puzzled.
JonBenet Ramsey's tragic death occurred when she was just 6 years old. A mountain of uncertainty and anguish have beset her family for years. Her brother Burke has been silent for 28 years, but now he is coming up, and the truth he tells is devastating. Come with us as we reveal the truth about the tragic end to this charming kid star. The terrible tragedy of JonBenet Ramsey first devastated millions of people all across the globe about 30 years ago. The discovery of the girl's body in the family's basement, where she was just 6 years old, ruined an otherwise happy Christmas season and will bring her loved ones unending sorrow. But now, after keeping quiet for 28 years, her elder brother Burke opens out, and the world is astonished by what he says. Burke was a very young boy, just 9 years old, when JonBenet passed away. He was still caught in the midst of the subsequent media frenzy. On the contrary, it thrust him into the limelight and cast him as someone who may have been privy to more information than he admitted. Hesitance, accusers, and conjecturers circulated. Their reactions towards the family ranged from sympathetic to suspicious. Dissecting the Ramseys' every action became an art form. On that fateful night, suspicions swirled. Had an unknown someone gained entry? Is it possible that someone within the house is to blame? After being silent for 28 years, Burke, who is now a grown man in his late 30s, decided to come up in an interview with Dr. Phil. As he reflected on that difficult period of his life, his voice quivered with emotion. Standing at his sister's burial, he recalled looking down at her little coffin and thinking her eyes were peculiar. He remembered that one of them didn't seem right. On his impressionable mind, it made an indelible mark. His heart sank at that same second. Death was a concept he didn't quite grasp at the time, he said. But Burke claimed he too wept when his father gently told him his sister had passed on to paradise and then collapsed into sobs. Everything changed that moment in the basement when JonBenet's lifeless body was located. A youthful beauty queen, she wore her pageant gowns with a smile on her face. Yet, the horrific reality of her death supplanted that picture of purity. Accusations surfaced that she had been abused. Her skull fractured, and she had been strangled. No family should ever have to go through what that family did. An even more chilling development was the horrific ransom note that had been stashed away in the Ramsey residence. The amount wanted was $118K. Which strangely matched a bonus that John Ramsey, the father, had gotten from work not long ago. The lengthy and unusually detailed message was penned on one of Patsy Ramsey's personal notepads while she was inside the house. The investigators were perplexed. Who, they thought, could possibly compose such a lengthy message while in the midst of a crime? That hint alone convinced many that someone on the inside had to be responsible for such a thing. Burke, the amiable youngster who had ostensibly slept through it all, was the last person anybody expected to be the center of suspicion. In the midst of the mayhem, people began to point fingers and ask why he remained still. For what reason didn't he find it exciting? I don't understand why he stayed in his room. There were those who thought he could have known the outcome from the start. He was hesitant to deny hitting his sister with a torch or bat, but he immediately denied it when confronted explicitly. In no world. His account suggests he remained in bed, perplexed and uncertain about the events unfolding below. Something terrible was occurring, or perhaps there was a deadly person in his imagination. Still, he was at a loss as to what to do. With his parents' care, he felt secure. Many later noted that Burke appeared to smile as the interview was underway. The people who studied his facial expressions, however, clarified that the thing that appeared to be a grin was actually an anxious reaction, not an indication of joy. Reporters and attorneys who had been following the case closely chimed in as Burke started to speak. Many recalled how Burke had risen to the status of one of the media industry's most in-demand interviewers. This was due to the fact that he had never previously provided a public account of his position. And things became much worse when his dad, John, opened up about how the spotlight drove a wedge between their family. A melancholy outing even included a peaceful walk to the supermarket. A headline in the newspaper accused young Burke of the crime one day. In the store, he sobbed uncontrollably. Even though they were under a lot of strain, the Ramseys tried to keep their kid safe. John and Patsy did their best to make his life seem regular. But in a society where everyone is always evaluating your actions, how can you ever shield a child from harm? There were investigators, evidence markers, and unsolved mysteries throughout the residence, as shown even in the interior film. In addition to footprints and what seemed to be stun gun marks on JonBenet's body, they discovered a hefty torch that might have been used as a weapon, a homemade strangling tool fashioned from one of Patsy's paintbrushes, and other suspicious markings. Curiously, though, no obvious indicators of a break-in were found. That brought the probe full round to the family. Who would break into a house and cause so much disturbance if they couldn't even leave a fingerprint? Burke was also taken into an interrogation room by the police. He was asked thoughtful questions in those early interviews, which have now been made public on tape. The police investigated the possibility that his parents attempted to hide the fact that he had inadvertently injured his sister. However, evidence of that was never shown. Burke has moved on from his past, worked his way up to software engineer, and is now trying to remain out of the spotlight. There were those who questioned his decision to enter the public glare when he ultimately did. No proof connected him to the crime, yet others still thought he came across poorly. Those who had never been in his position scrutinized, evaluated, and misinterpreted his facial expressions and nonverbal cues. There is still no clear explanation for JonBenet's death, even after all this time. The case remains open, as the chief of police in Boulder recently reminded the public. A small girl's life was tragically taken too soon, and her family is still struggling to find answers and find justice. Many are still captivated by this tragic enigma. Perhaps it's due to JonBenet's youth. Perhaps it's because the case covers every possible emotion: riches, beauty, sorrow, and mistrust. Perhaps it's because, even after all this time, we all secretly hope that justice will eventually prevail. For whatever reason, the tale has become even more intricate with the arrival of Burke Ramsey's long-awaited comments. When you thought Burke had spoken up about the family, JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, shocked everyone with his passionate remarks that made people reconsider the accusations against the family. Keep watching, because it appears like the truth is going to come out. John Ramsey, her father, finds it incomprehensible that the perpetrator may still be at large. Even more perplexing to him is the fact that justice has never been meted out for such a heinous crime. For many years, John has carried this sorrow. Someone who brutally abducted his daughter has never faced penalties, even though he has endured unimaginable pain. John Ramsey is certain that the killer of his daughter would still be at large if the police had done their jobs correctly from the start. His wife Patsy and he were singled out for accusations rather than the actual perpetrator, he claims. The initial assumption cast a shadow of mistrust that persisted despite the lack of concrete evidence to support it. The family was forced to cope with the horrible loss they had just endured while simultaneously being secluded, grieving, and fighting for their lives. He went on to say that dealing with such strain was draining and painful. Those who were meant to assist them were treating them like suspects, and they lost their daughter in a terrible way. It seemed like I was trapped in an endless nightmare. This type of myopic thinking, in his opinion, prevented the investigation from progressing further. They missed out on other leads and suspects that may have solved the case by fixating solely on the family. Over the course of several days, months, and years, the fallout from those first mistakes only became worse. Defensiveness, isolation, and a lack of willingness to acknowledge they could have been mistaken characterized the investigators' behavior. They persisted in adopting the same unsuccessful course of action rather than re-evaluating the matter from a new perspective or consulting with other specialists. This intransigence has been a major roadblock on John's path to justice. How Patsy fought during those years is something he recalls with clarity. The charges broke her heart since she loved JonBenet so much. She was greatly burdened by the tension, constant questioning, and public scrutiny. She died of cancer in 2006, but she and her husband never learned who murdered their daughter. John also bears the burden of his wife's unfinished business, who did not get the opportunity to know the truth before she died. According to John, the case is still being handled by the same detectives, even though they have failed before. That is startling to him. It baffles him that no one with more up-to-date knowledge or expertise has been tasked with finding a solution. According to him, it seems like they are more concerned with preserving their reputation than with identifying the true perpetrator of the crime, and they don't want assistance. Justice is being postponed or even obstructed, in his view, because some individuals are unable to acknowledge they were wrong. This, to him, is about more than simply pride. The most heartbreaking part is that the people who should be supporting him appear more worried about maintaining their reputations than doing the right thing, even though he has spent all day attempting to honor his daughter's memory. He's also keenly conscious of the general public's perception of the case. The press capitalized on the early targeting of the family because of how quickly it was picked up. False information circulated, with many people casting the Ramseys in a negative light. According to John, this further clouded everyone's ability to assess the matter objectively. The world became engrossed in drama, conjecture, and gossip, rather than addressing the underlying question of who had the power or incentive to harm JonBenet. John, nevertheless, is still not giving up. The use of DNA testing and other forms of modern forensic research has given him hope that previously unnoticed evidence may be rediscovered. Someday, he hopes, new people will come in and look at everything differently, armed with greater resources. According to him, that would be a huge step towards understanding what transpired that night. Juvenation isn't driving John to find the truth about his daughter's death. It's all about making sure she gets the justice she deserved. Their main goal is to prevent any other family from going through the same thing. The most important thing is to prevent the perpetrator from harming anybody else in the future. Even though he's clearly distraught, his voice is resolute. His memories of JonBenet are filled with affection and warmth. He remembers her not only as a victim, but also as the energetic, joyful youngster who brightened their house. Even though this crime occurred 28 years ago, investigators have never stopped trying to piece together what happened. John Ramsey's abrupt mention of DNA evidence made things intriguing. Is the truth about to come out as a result? Find out by continuing to watch. Nearing her 35th birthday, JonBenet Ramsey would be among the living today. However, her bright personality and love of kid beauty pageants live on in history, and her birthday will never be forgotten. So sad that she didn't make it past the age of 6. Her corpse was found in the basement of her family's house on the day after Christmas in 1996. A brutal beating and strangulation had befallen her. Not only has no one been found guilty or even arrested in relation to her murder, but her name has gone viral nationwide as a result of her terrible death as well. No one has been able to figure out who killed JonBenet, even though over 25 years have gone by. The Ramseys were expecting a peaceful and cheerful morning after Christmas, but their plans were thwarted when John and Patsy discovered their young child, JonBenet, was not in her bed. The discovery of a handwritten message alleging her kidnapping and demanding $118,000 for her safe return escalated their fear to full-blown terror. With a voice quivering with terror, Patsy dialed the emergency number, pleading for assistance. In spite of their prompt arrival, the police botched the home's security, leaving a trail of chaos that would linger with the case indefinitely. After the authorities arrived, JonBenet remained missing for 6 long hours. As if the crime scene weren't sensitive enough, individuals kept coming in and out of the house, touching objects, moving around, and destroying any clues. Some crucial evidence was either discarded or completely disregarded. It is quite unlikely that anything can be salvaged due to the initial handling of the case. Paula Woodward, a reporter based in Colorado, was covering the story at the time. All of a sudden, she recalls how disorganized everything was. However, the manner in which JonBenet's corpse was discovered was something she would never forget. 6 hours subsequent to the 911 call, it was John Ramsey who personally found her in the basement. Imagine if the police had instead located her. The lone remaining investigator in the home had casually instructed him to have a look around. What if there was no trauma to the corpse? However, according to specialists, the probe was severely hampered when John instead lifted her and carried her upstairs. John painstakingly recounted the moment. He described an initial surge of relief upon believing he had discovered his daughter unharmed. However, his initial shock soon faded as he saw she wasn't breathing. Inconsolable at his newfound knowledge, he let forth a piercing scream of pain. The cop's hasty judgment just added to the unfathomability of the catastrophe. Paula shares the view of many that the local police utterly damaged the case by immediately assigning guilt to either John or Patsy. John recalls the excruciating pain of being interrogated about insignificant matters while the actual offender escaped with his life. Instead of being accused of harming his own child, all he wanted was for the correct person to be located. Many are curious as to how things may have turned out differently had seasoned murder investigators jumped on the case right away. John is of the opinion that many of the problems that arose might have been prevented if proper precautions had been taken. According to him, standard crime scene protocols were not adhered to. Instead, a catastrophic disaster occurred as a result of a combination of naivete and hubris. Plus, the police started giving the press false information, and the media was quick to publish anything that sounded interesting, regardless of its veracity. Disclosures about JonBenet's participation in beauty pageants sent the media into a tailspin. Everything appeared to shift due to that one fact. The first photo of her in pageant makeup appeared in the headlines only 4 days after her death, and the tale quickly went viral. A lack of empathy replaced genuine interest. Given her upbringing, many started to hold her parents responsible. Some thought Patsy was trying to make JonBenet follow her goal by entering him in these contests, while others claimed they would never have allowed their child to participate. As John pointed out, though, it was completely different. The pageants were fun for their outgoing kid. The group even made fun of her, saying that she needed setbacks to teach her that life isn't always rainbows and unicorns. As a family, they always liked it, and it was never about Patsy trying to push her. Nonetheless, many people will never forget the picture of JonBenet with his makeup on. Regardless of how many times John and Patsy denied any participation or the lack of evidence to support those allegations, The public had already formed an opinion about the family and passed judgment. The years went by with no resolution to the matter. Patsy died of cancer in 2006, and she and her husband never learned who murdered their daughter. However, a fresh finding provided some optimism 2 years later. The district attorney's office disclosed that JonBenet's clothes had DNA from an unidentified guy, establishing that John and Patsy were not to blame. A sincere apology was even sent to the family by DNA. John thought that was a good start, but he didn't consider it justice. He was well aware that they had a long way to go before they could identify the true killer. Recent developments in science are solely responsible for making this DNA finding a reality. Although it cleared the Ramseys' names, it failed to identify the killer of their daughter. Silence returned to the case once again. However, John's optimism was rekindled by a further breakthrough. A guy who had evaded capture for more than 40 years was apprehended in 2018 using the identical DNA technique. A fresh prospect became apparent to John after his incarceration. His visit to one of the laboratories yielded shocking results. Real results were supplied by the technology, which was strong and thorough. Why not JonBenet's predator, if it could locate a calculated one after all these years? John was adamant about having the remaining crime scene DNA samples retested with these modern instruments. If he wanted to finally conclude the case, he thought this was his best chance. DNA specialist C.C. Moore compares her work to assembling a huge jigsaw. She has solved more than 200 cold cases. Her specialty is genetic genealogy, which she used to piece together family trees and reveal identities through DNA comparisons. The practice, which had its origins in reuniting long-lost relatives, has evolved into a tool for the pursuit of criminals. For a little while, Cece is the only one who knows what that person did, and that hits her hard when she is ultimately able to identify a suspect, she said. And it's a hefty burden. With access to the evidence, she is certain that she might assist in identifying the assailant who took JonBenet's life. In contrast to the few dozen locations used by conventional forensic laboratories, her and her colleague Dr. Ellen Greytack's study is based on analyzing 1 million points in a person's DNA. This improves their odds of discovering fresh leads, even in the absence of a suspect. Modern DNA research, according to Dr. Ellen, is very different from its predecessors. You could either match DNA to a person in a database, or it would do nothing, much like a fingerprint. They may now use far more in-depth analysis to construct clues and identify new suspects. Their findings are significantly affected by the variation in the number of markers they analyze. John Ramsey has been eagerly anticipating this type of development. He thinks we should do something now. He has ordered these cutting-edge methods to be used by an impartial, trustworthy laboratory to all untested materials collected from the site of the crime. Even after pleading with the Boulder police, he has not been granted permission. According to him, the investigators who are currently handling the case have always been against him. They thought he or Patsy was involved right from the start. Everything has been tainted by that distrust. John now believes that the department is afraid to be proven incorrect, despite the abundance of available scientific evidence. He beseeches them to release their grip on the past and move on to the present with the utmost seriousness that this situation merits. The waiting has worn him down. He's sick of being asked. He has had enough of making excuses. He is of the belief that cutting-edge technology has the potential to reveal the truth. Despite all that has happened, John refuses to give up hope. Hope for his own healing, and hope that others will not have to endure what his family suffered. JonBenet should get what she deserves, and her narrative should have a happy conclusion. People contact him daily to inquire as to why he hasn't solved the case yet. However, without the DNA proof, how was he ever going to pull it off? If the authorities do not allow John to join the investigative team, he will not be able to make any headway, John stated. It's unbelievable that the DNA evidence from JonBenet's remains remains sealed in the evidence room of the Boulder Police Department, even after all these years. The police are withholding crucial evidence, despite the fact that the technology to solve the case is readily available today. If there is no apparent justification for concealing it, that fact alone is devastating. It would be horrible if the delay wasn't because of openness or a good reason. The father of JonBenet, John Ramsey, has done something drastic because he is desperate. He has petitioned the Colorado governor to intervene and order the local police to turn over the DNA samples they have collected. He still thinks it's a reasonable and straightforward request, even after all these years. The remarks individuals made while signing the petition, he added, were the most moving. The message that many people shared was that the killer of an innocent kid must be punished to the fullest extent of the law. That isn't occurring at the moment, which is really annoying for John. He is now placing his trust in contemporary technology, with the hope that it will provide the long-awaited answers they have been searching for. According to him, they are open to doing whatever that the scientific community or other professionals may come up with in order to find out who killed his daughter. Even if it hurts, they will accept defeat if they have tried everything and still have not succeeded. Yet, to do nothing at all? He claims it would be dishonorable and negligent in addition to being incorrect. No matter their background, John is willing to accept assistance from anybody who helps advance this cause. Even some of the most surprising individuals have shown their support. A retired police officer called Lou Smith recorded some old tapes that have only now been made public. The argument is still being advanced by his voice. The tapes hold great promise for Lou's family, who hold the belief that the individual responsible for JonBenet's death is alive and well. They are determined to find him. Was the made-up thief eventually apprehended? We will discover. Over the last 28 years, John has experienced a great deal of pain. The anguish of losing his daughter was unbearable for any father. Cancer also took the life of his wife, Patsy. The media instead thrust him into the limelight, where he was questioned, condemned, and pulled apart rather than offered comfort in his loss. The media continued to follow him even after his second marriage. Jan, his newlywed wife, expressed her shock at seeing their wedding photo on the front of a gossip magazine. John, though it all, has never lost faith in his ability to find out what happened. He is quite critical of the way the Boulder police investigated and handled the situation. One individual, though, in particular, stuck out to him: Lou Smith, a retired investigator. Lou did not conform to the protocol established by the local police upon his inclusion in the investigating team. In his opinion, JonBenet's relatives couldn't be held accountable. On the contrary, he was certain that burglars from the neighborhood had broken in that night. It was Lou's record that was truly remarkable. Throughout his tenure, he had the key to almost 200 cold case homicides solved. The individual who injured JonBenet, in his mind, was the product of a botched abduction attempt. The investigators in Boulder, however, were not pleased with his judgment. Whenever he proposed they investigate the invader idea further, he met with resistance and rejection. He remained steadfast in his conviction, nevertheless. Paula Woodward, a reporter who has been following the story from the beginning, stated that Lou had done something unique. After collecting and meticulously sorting through all the reports, he reached a strong conclusion. The evidence did not implicate the Ramseys. Someone had probably broken in because of this. The local cops, however, were not appreciative and instead made fun of Lou. After only 1 year with the official squad, Lou decided he had had enough and quit. However, he persisted in his investigation. He maintained contact with the Ramseys and continued his independent investigation. He amassed hundreds of tips during the years. He used all that information to compile a list of names that the police had never given any serious consideration to as possible suspects. Cindy, Lou's daughter, received the list from him before he died in 2010. Cindy is now carrying on her father's business. Subtly but surely, she has been collecting DNA samples from all of the individuals listed as suspects. She hopes that one day they may be able to identify the perpetrator of this heinous murder by analyzing the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenet's clothes, which John Ramsey has been granted permission to view. According to her, her dad gave her a moniker and pointed her in the right direction. She and her colleagues have vowed to do whatever it takes to keep the investigation going and prevent the case from going cold turkey. John is clinging to a glimmer of optimism. He mentioned that DNA technology is becoming more advanced suggesting that this riddle might still be solvable with right application. For the rest of his life, he plans to keep demanding answers, he added. He did, however, quietly concede that he is unsure whether the problem will ever be resolved. The governor of Colorado has not yet responded to John's plea. The possibility that the case will remain unresolved indefinitely worries him in the absence of such DNA. It breaks his heart to think that justice may not be served for his daughter. Upon being questioned about his thoughts when JonBenet is mentioned, John's voice quivered. His sole intention, he stated, would be to express his utmost regret to her. Poor him, he was unable to save her. As a parent, he should have done it, but he failed to do so. That's the burden he bears. Still, he is aware that above all else, she was adored. Plus, he's still holding out hope that they'll reunite at some point. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and watch the next video I've uploaded if you liked it.